for being here in person. For those of you watching on Aurora TV right now on our website or on YouTube, we're here today to discuss a change in leadership at APD that many of you have already heard about. You're going to hear from Aurora City Manager Jim Twombly first, followed by Mayor Mike Kaufman. They'll both make some brief remarks and then do their best to take your questions. For those of you here in studio, we actually have a microphone that we're going to pass around. Brittany is wearing a headset. She'll hand it to you if you have your question. We just want to make sure everybody who's watching at home can hear what you have to ask, and we'll also hear their response. But I'll send it over to City Manager Twombly with some opening comments.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you all for being here this morning. I'll just start off by saying it's my responsibility to continually evaluate the operations of the city, the management, and also key personnel. I do that through looking at facts, also discussing my evaluation of what's in the best interest of the city. Chief Wilson prioritized community involvement. This is something we all recognize as a strength of hers. However, there's more to being chief than that, and that involves management of the police department. There also needs to be effective management of department operations, engagement with officers and staff, and a strategic approach to moving the department forward. There were two main themes that continue to rise up as top of concerns: overall management and overall leadership. This was a decision that came with a considerable amount of thought and ongoing discussions with officers in the police department. Division Chief Chris Jewell will temporarily oversee the operations of the Aurora Police Department. Chief Jewell has been tapped. He is currently, or was, Division Chief over operations, and the reason we tapped him is, for one, because the three district commanders who report to Chief Jewell are very strong, and we expect that this will have the least disturbance, I guess, in terms of the operations of the police department. We'll work to name an interim chief in the near future, maybe in a 2 to 3 week time frame, while Chris is the acting chief. We'll also begin immediately to work towards the recruitment of a permanent chief, which we would hope to have on board within about a 6-month time frame. With that, I do want to make a couple of statements about the department and our commitment to making the necessary changes and to implement the consent decree, not only the letter of the decree, but also the spirit. We remain committed to holding officers accountable. We remain committed to transparency, and we remain committed to our community and our police department. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Kaufman.
Thank you. First, I just want to say that we are city manager form of government, that this is a decision of the city manager, but I support that decision. Myself and the city council, although we are not involved in the termination process, we will vote on a new police chief. I want to say thank you to Vanessa Wilson for her years of dedicated service to this department. And I've supported her to become the police chief, and I just want to say that she, I thought, was the right person at the right time for this city, that we were going through a pretty challenging time in terms of restoring the trust in our community, between the Aurora Police Department and our community, and I think she was instrumental not only in gaining that trust back, but also in setting the department on a path for reform, necessary reforms, and we will continue on that path of reform for this city, to continue on the reforms that she has already set in place. I had some concerns as the situation changed in Aurora and crime became an increasing issue about her leadership, but I'll say this, that my concerns never rose to a level of saying that we ought to replace the police chief. However, this report about the critical role of records and the lack of leadership in making sure that that process worked effectively, I think compromised the public safety of our city. And I think that was and is a monumental failure of leadership. And so I'm here today to voice my support for this decision.
Again, if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and Brittany will find you. If you can introduce yourself, who you are, who you represent, that would be great.
Hi, Rob Lowe, Fox 31. Mr. Mayor and Jim Twombly, you both mentioned that audit report that was released yesterday. But Chief Wilson's attorney says you guys knew about those audit results months ago, and that the issue was staffing, which you've been asking for months, and that you finally approved the staffing in February. So is it fair to blame that as a failure of leadership?
In the 2022 budget, Chief Wilson requested 10 new positions in the records section. And we had our police auditor already working in the police records section at that time, doing an audit of the CCJRA records and requests. And so when we got that request for the additional positions, I asked Michelle Crawford, the police auditor, what her thoughts were about granting that request, either 10 new positions or somewhere between 0 and 10. Her response at the time was that the record section was so disorganized, processes so inefficient, that her feeling was that just adding more people to a bad situation would not resolve the problem. She also pointed out that there were a number of vacant positions at the time, that the effort should be made to fill those positions first, in addition to making the changes necessary. I'd also say that because of what Michelle found, we added some additional, we put together a team of employees made up of folks who have had Lean Six Sigma training and process and continuous improvement training to go in and look at some of those processes and the organization and see if there are ways that they could help remedy the situation. They did go in, they came up with a list of recommendations. However, they're full-time employees with the city, and they didn't have the time to be able to go in and actually oversee implementation of those changes. At that point, we decided we needed to go outside the organization and hire a consultant to come in and help us with that. So while Chief Wilson pointed out that there was a problem, my feeling was that just throwing more employees into a bad situation was not the answer. And so it was only later, after the consultant came in and recommended some changes, that we've added some additional employees. I think they're temp employees there to help with the implementation of the changes.
Jim, one quick follow-up. How much influence did the new city council have on your decision?
This, as I said in my opening statement, is based on my evaluation of the situation, my discussion with officers, my review of the report that came out on the record situation, and then the overall evaluation that I've made.
Jim, Jennifer Kowaleski with Denver 7. As the city manager, when were you aware of the records backlog, and why wasn't something done sooner?
Well, Michelle Crawford went in to do her audit based on the backlog in CCJRA records requests. I became aware of the backlog in the transcription process on March 18th when I read the report from PRI. And I immediately sent an email to the chief, to Jason Batchelor, and to John Schneebeck saying that I needed a report, a plan from them by the following Wednesday, which would provide me with details of how the backlog would be eliminated. I wanted to know how they were going to do it, what the timeline was, and I told them that they needed to expend all resources necessary to eliminate that backlog. And if that meant working with Michelle Crawford, if it meant working with the consultant, if it meant bringing in temporary employees, whatever it took, we needed to eliminate that backlog.
So to be clear, you weren't aware of this for months, as Chief Wilson's attorney has said.
I became aware of it when I read the report on March 18th.
And just one other follow-up. Obviously, Chief Wilson has an attorney. Is the city prepared for a lawsuit and prepared to show she was fired with cause?
She was not fired for cause. She was fired as an at-will employee. And the city, I don't want to say it, but the city gets sued from time to time, and so we're ready to defend whatever lawsuit comes.
Kara Mason from the Sentinel. Do you have, I guess, first of all, how did you choose PRI? And do you have any concerns about their impartiality?
PRI, we sent out a request for proposals. We got 2 responses to those proposals. We had a team of employees that scored those proposals. PRI scored higher. We looked at work that they'd done in other cities and counties. They'd worked with the city of Vancouver, Washington, and Clark County, which in which Vancouver is. They also had done work in Commerce City. We checked with Commerce City. And so they had done a lot of work with in police records, and so they scored highest from the panel. They interviewed, they addressed the issues that we wanted to address, and they'd done similar studies in the past. So that's why they were selected.
You didn't have any concerns about the founders' posts on social media?
I didn't know about those until yesterday. We don't generally, we don't ever check political backgrounds of consultants that we hire, what they've, posted, or, we don't do a litmus test on whether they're conservative or Democrats or whatever.
Elise Schmelzer, Denver Post. You said you had problems with Chief Wilson's leadership and management. What specific examples can you provide of failures in that department from her?
Well, I'm not going to get into specifics on that. It's an overall evaluation based on a lot of input.
As a follow-up question, I heard that you were essentially told by city council that if you didn't fire Vanessa Wilson, they would fire you. Is that true?
I've never been told that by council. I've certainly heard rumors to that effect. I've never been told that.
Did you consult with the independent monitor for the consent decree before terminating Chief Wilson?
No.
Why not?
Why? I don't know why I would. This is an internal matter that has to do with management of the department.
Are you concerned about the timing of this? You're just beginning, you probably haven't even started implementing, or maybe you have. You're just at the beginning of the process, and now there's a huge shakeup in leadership.
As I've said, we are committed to implementing the consent decree, working with the monitor, and moving this department forward.
And then do you think her leadership style or her, in some way contributed to the increase in crime in Aurora recently?
It's very difficult to draw direct lines from leadership style or activities of the police department to crime. What I will say is that I think we need to demonstrate to the community leadership in our commitment to fighting crime.
But the rise in crime recently was a factor in this decision, or no?
It's very concerning.
And then lastly for me, what about the attrition in the department, the number of officers who have left during her tenure? Was that a factor?
That's a factor also, yes.
So I have a couple of questions. One, could you please, you've stood up here many times standing by Vanessa Wilson as recently as a few months ago. Can you please describe her as a leader? How would you describe her leadership style?
As a leader in the community, I think she excelled. I think that she did, in terms of the many crises that we have experienced, I think she did very well in responding to those. I think obviously that was her strength, and she deserves accolades for that. But as I said, there's more to managing a police department than that aspect of it.
And to follow up on an earlier question, was any part of your decision to fire Vanessa Wilson to save your own job?
That's never been a consideration, no.
What's on the top of your list for the next chief? What are you looking for?
Well, I think from my interactions, discussions with officers, I think one of the things both an interim chief and the next permanent chief will need to do really is help stabilize the department, engage with officers, and support them and show confidence, I think, in the mission of what the department is.
Have you voiced any of these concerns?
Sorry, can we ask the question to the microphone, please?
Yes. Hi, Mr. Twomley. This is Allison Sherry at Colorado Public Radio. I just wanted to clarify something that somebody asked earlier. Do you attribute any crime increases in Aurora to her at all directly?
No.
Okay. I also just wanted to ask you to react. The members of the Aurora delegation in the legislature, a number of them, many women of color, say the firing of Vanessa Wilson is going to send a terrible message to the people in Aurora because she's made such gains in the community. It's a long statement. But I wanted to see if you wanted to respond to that.
Well, frankly, I'm not sure how to respond to that. I mean, I'm sure many people outside of the organization, even in the organization, may be critical of a decision. That's something we just have to face. Our commitments that Vanessa articulated to the community have not changed and will not change.
As a follow-up, has the city agreed to any severance package as a part of this decision with the chief?
Yes, when Chief Wilson was appointed, we had a letter of appointment that outlined a severance package should she be terminated. And so that we are honoring that package that she requested.
And that was 12 months?
That's
full
12
pay?
months, yes.
Why did the city decide to honor that?
Well, it's because it's in that appointment letter. We said that we would do that.
Had you addressed some of these concerns or all of these concerns with Chief Wilson before the last few weeks to give her a chance to perhaps correct some of these issues?
We've had numerous discussions.
Over how long a period of time?
Well, the first serious discussion about this issue took place about approximately a month ago.
But had you already made up your mind at that point to fire her, or that she needed to go?
No, that's why we're having discussions.
Vicente Arenas with Fox 31. Do you feel that Chief Wilson has been given enough time to handle what has turned out to be incredible problems at the police department, while at the same time handling historical events in the city? It seems like there has been a lot going on. Did she have enough time to iron out these problems that seem to have been inherited from the previous administration?
Yes.
And what is that time frame, especially with the records that came out? How much time did you give her to fix the problems in the records department that you pointed out this morning?
Well, she's been the chief She was the chief for 2 years and 3 months,
And you found out when about the records, was it, that you said?
March 18th.
March 18th? So that means you gave her 2 weeks to fix all the records problems?
That's not what I'm saying.
What are you saying?
She wasn't fired because of the records problem.
Why was she fired?
I said that in my opening statement. Well, it's really comes down to a lack of confidence on my part for her to be able to lead the department.
Who all did you talk to when you were evaluating her future career? Did you talk to police officers or the other people in the community that you talked to?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We appreciate it.
So one more question. So I'm Michaelia with CBS Denver. I want to know why you feel changing course is what's right for the community now. Mayor Kaufman, I know you mentioned she was the right person for the right time. Why now?
Well, given the challenges that we had when she came on, I think she was the right person for the right time at that time. Given the fact that we have a rising crime, given the fact that there was a lack of urgency in her leadership in resolving this problem, certainly caused me to support the city manager in his decision.
Thanks, everybody.
Can we hear from the interim chief at all? What your goals are for the future, or how you're
Hi, welcome back, and you just heard a news conference there from the city of Aurora with the city manager, Jim Twombly, who took quite a few harsh questions, or quite a line of questioning there, as well as city mayor Mike Kaufman about the firing of Police Chief Vanessa Wilson. So a couple of top-line takeaways, two main themes from Jim Twombly as to why he opted to go ahead and fire Police Chief Vanessa Wilson. Number one, that he mentioned was overall management, and number two was overall leadership. Chris Jewell, by the way, will temporarily oversee the department for what Twombly expects to be about a 2 to 3 week period before an interim police chief is named, and then a permanent search will take place with the expectation that within the next 6 months, a permanent police chief will be named to head up the police department in the city of Aurora. Now, with that in mind as well, Aurora Mayor Mike Kaufman made a couple of comments as well. He said he supported City Manager Jim Twombly's decision to go ahead and fire Vanessa Wilson, while Kaufman complimented Wilson quite a bit. He said that she was the right person at the right time. He also said that he had some concerns about Wilson's leadership atop the department and that crime had become an increasing issue in his mind. And kind of a bit of a standout quote from Mayor Kaufman was he said of Wilson, at least at the end of Wilson's tenure, quote, "There was a monumental failure of leadership," end quote. And a lot of this was based on an audit that the findings from that were released yesterday, and we got quite a bit in the way of an understanding about some of those takeaways here today, and that ultimately, as you just heard, led to the firing of Vanessa Wilson. Now, a couple other things before we kind of wrap on up was that, as I mentioned off the top, was that Jim Twombly took quite a few pretty tough questions, including about the high turnover rate at the Aurora Police Department, whether or not the city council had pressured him into this, as had been rumored, as to whether Twombly was doing this ultimately just to save his own job. He said that this was ultimately his own decision, but that he did say that the high turnover rate in the police department and the low morale was a big part of the reason that he opted to fire Vanessa Wilson, and that he had lost his confidence in her ability to lead the department. So, again, some of those top line takeaways. We'll get the expectations over the next couple of weeks, there'll be an interim chief named within the next 6 months, a permanent chief named, and that Wilson, while both Mayor Kaufman and City Manager Twombly praised her ability to kind of get involved in the community. That was kind of a repeated theme about her. They also said that they felt that she didn't have the ability to lead the department and that her management wasn't up to par either. So again, some of those top line takeaways from that press conference from Jim Twombly and Mayor Mike Kaufman from the city of Aurora. We'll, of course, have more updates on 9 News at noon, as well as on 9 News at 4, 5, 6, 9, 10. In the meantime, I'm Chris Bianchi, and thanks for joining us here for this press conference from the city of Aurora.